Neil Gaiman, comic book legend, writing legend, lots of people making money on Neil Gaiman associated stuff. The guy's got his fingers into Hollywood, streaming shows, movies, books, obviously comic books. Lots of adaptations of the Neil Gaiman works are out there. And obviously there are a lot of sexual abuse allegations going on around Neil Gaiman these days. He's said that he didn't do it. He was emotionally unavailable, but sexually available, kind of saying that these women, they misconstrued it and, I didn't want to date them. And therefore they're coming out and saying these horrendous things about me. Now there is a little bit of fallout, and I will get into the details and some of my thoughts on this and what's happening with Neil Gaiman right now. Dark Horse Comics will no longer publish the comic adaptations of Neil Gaiman's works, including the author's Anansi Boys series. The publishing house cited the recent allegations of sexual abuse against Neil Gaiman as their reason behind the decision on Friday. New York Magazine published a cover story earlier this month detailing new claims of sexual assault and abuse from 8 women. The report came several months after the July 2024 podcast Master, which reported on earlier graphic accusations by 5 women, 4 of which were among those cited by New York Magazine. So there you go. Dark Horse Comics will no longer be publishing the Anansi Boys adaptation of the Neil Gaiman book in comic book form. I believe the 7th issue had just released this month, and I think the 8th issue was supposed to come out next month. They've also announced that they're not going to do any collected editions of this, and I'm not particularly surprised by this. The Me Too movement, the awareness on sexual abuse is certainly higher today than it's ever been. And a lot of times people want to be very proactive instead of waiting for all the investigations and everything to kind of flesh itself out there in the end. And people want to be proactive, and they don't want to be associated with a writer that's generating so many enormously negative headlines in this. And in a situation like this, I am conflicted because I read the article. It's very dirty stuff. It's not a particularly fun read. I can tell you, actually, it's a downright awful read. But within it, there are enough similarities between the stories. There is a pattern basically played out within them that makes me think there is at least a degree of validity to the stories that they were telling. And even Mr. Gaiman himself said, well, some of it is outright fabrication. Some of it has a kernel of truth to it, but it's been, fabricated and enhanced and stuff like that it doesn't actually look like the truth. But basically admitting some of the stuff in there definitely did happen, but he's, from his point of view, not quite as bad. But it does make me believe a lot of what they are saying. But on the other hand, he hasn't been tried by a jury of his peers. I am American. I think about these things from a very, very culturally American perspective, that you get to have your day in court. You get to defend yourself against your accusers. You get to stand up to them and present your own evidence and what your perspective on the events were. And then a jury of your peers gets to decide the guilt, not guilt, whatever your involvement, what level of culpability you ultimately play within the story itself. Maybe you're totally exonerated, maybe only partially guilty. Maybe you don't even go to that type of court. You go to civil court. Maybe there's some type of compensatory demand on you that you have to go back and pay and make things right. So when I think of these things, I think from a very American perspective, that until Neil Gaiman has had his day in court and got to face his accusers, that there should be a presumption of innocence, especially by the governments and all that kind of stuff. So in that respect, I do wish Neil Gaiman would get the opportunity to meet his accuser and not have things happen to him before everything has been fleshed out and he's had his day in court. On the other hand, Dark Horse is not the American government. Dark Horse is not the state of New York. Dark Horse is not the United Kingdom. They are a private company, and they are allowed to do business or not do business with whoever they want, essentially for whatever reason they want, as long as they aren't being prejudicial in that, i.e., I don't want to do business with you because of your religion or your race or your gender or something like that. As long as they're not discriminating against you, I think Dark Horse Comics should be able to do business with whoever they want to and not do business with whoever they want to, as long as they're obviously not breaking contracts. And I obviously am not privy to the Dark Horse Neil Gaiman contracts or whatever. So as long as they're not breaking the law and they're not being discriminatory about it, I think they have the right to do it, although I do wish people would give a little bit of patience and time to let the allegations to come to the forefront, for the proper investigative authorities out there to look into it, the validity of it, and whether or not they could bring charges, or if this is going to go into civil court, what kind of NDAs and stuff were involved and what was broken and all that stuff, before we have people going out there and, taking kind of punitive actions against Neil Gaiman, which I would consider pulling a contract and no longer publishing their works or works based on their work, that have been licensed out, to be pretty punitive based on what they had said there. Fortunately, there are smarter people out there than me, one of them being Neil Gaiman himself, and this is what he had to say about accusations that have not been proven out or vetted to be completely 100% true. On a day like today, it's worth saying, I believe survivors. Men must not close our eyes and minds to what happens to women in this world. We must fight alongside them for them to be believed at the ballot box and with art and by listening, and change this world for the better. So I would imagine, from the perspective of Neil Gaiman, at least the Neil Gaiman that wrote that tweet, they'll believe all women. We just got to believe everything without actually having a foundation of evidence or looking into it and vetting it and make sure there's factual information out there that things aren't being distorted, that perhaps we should just believe them whole cloth and believe every single thing that was put out in that article, which were very, very damning to Mr. Gaiman himself. So while me personally, I wish that companies like Dark Horse and DC and Amazon and people that had business arrangements with Neil Gaiman, who might not like the accusations, and I think they're disgusting, would be able to have the patience to let the stuff kind of play out and him to have his day in court before taking more punitive type actions against him, as a business partner. It sounds like Neil Gaiman himself, a certified feminist, and man, that was leading the charge in the Me Too movement, probably thinks we should just believe this all on face value. At least he did when he put that out, when it wasn't really affecting him personally. That's why you shouldn't put out so many blanket statements. He's like, oh yeah, you got to believe this stuff. What about when it actually affects you? You're probably going to feel a little bit differently. While I do think there's validity to some of the allegations, there's certainly some patterns there that you can certainly recognize once you read them. I don't know that this is the right move. And fortunately, at least at this point for Mr. Gaiman, Dark Horse is probably, as far as his business partners out there, was a very small revenue stream for him. In fact, he has several other projects that have not been interrupted. Amazon is also in production on a TV adaptation of the Anansi Boys with Whoopi Goldberg part of the cast, which is scheduled for release later this year. THR has learned season 2 of Netflix's The Sandman, another adaptation of Gaiman's work, is also still in production. THR reached out to Netflix for comment. Prime Video's Good Omens season 3 will end with a 90-minute episode in which Gaiman is not involved, and Disney paused production on its film adaptation of the Graveyard Book. So it sounds like the streaming adaptation of the Anansi Boys still in production with Whoopi Goldberg. I wonder how she's going to feel about this. These were some pretty vile allegations against Mr. Gaiman. But Whoopi Goldberg could stand to make some money off the man, so maybe she will stay out of that fight. Sounds like we're probably still going to get season 2 of Sandman Universe on Netflix, and I do believe the first season on Netflix was very successful, and they could probably use another successful season of that. Not everything has really been popping off for Netflix, and then it sounds like we're still going to get the Prime Video finale for Good Omens out there. But there is a pause in production for the Graveyard Book, the film adaptation for that for Disney. So it sounds like there's one company out there that decided to pause a bigger project that is likely far more lucrative for Mr. Gaiman himself than maybe the Anansi Boys comic book adaptation. We shall see. I think things will get far worse for Neil Gaiman before they get better. That's just the way that these type of things tend to play out. And like I said, there's some podcasts out there that were less than flattering, to put it mildly. And there is this feature-length article from New York Magazine, which was very, very damning to the character of Neil Gaiman. And really, when you look at his work, it makes it all that much more kind of gross and stuff. So I don't believe this will be the first company that will part ways and disconnect itself and separate their connection with Neil Gaiman. I don't know that he will get the Warren Ellis treatment. Warren Ellis still can't write books, although I think the Warren Ellis allegations were far more frivolous and less inflammatory than what is out there about Neil Gaiman. But Neil Gaiman has not had the Warren Ellis treatment yet. We'll see what happens if they just, look, Gaiman, you stay home, you're not allowed to work. And when all the women that have made accusations against you decide that you're allowed to work again, then we'll allow you to work again. Of course, that's comic books, and comic books is one of the most insularly incestuous industries in the entire world. And it seems like some of the bigger production houses that have a lot more money invested in these type of things are taking a slower, more deliberate approach to this. Definitely want to hear from you guys. I hate talking about this stuff. I certainly hated talking about that New York Magazine article, but I did get my thoughts out there. That was actually a really tough video to make. If you haven't seen that one, there is this video right here that I talked about the initial allegations. I don't go into a lot of detail because a lot of them are very disgusting, but I did give my thoughts on that initially, and obviously this is a follow-up to that.